I'm Adrienne Enns, and I welcome you to the Intention Sessions podcast. I want to inspire our most intentional living. In each episode, we'll talk to remarkable individuals who will share their authentic journeys and their insights with us. They're going to remind us that life's complexities can be our greatest teachers, and that intentional living can be expressed in an infinite number of ways. I hope you find some inspiration for your most intentional life right here. Today on the podcast, we have Sarah Hutchison. Sarah is a wellness entrepreneur, a creative, and also a busy mom. Her drive, creativity, and mark in the world are a testament to her commitment to her personal journey. Sarah was diagnosed with mental illness after the birth of her children, and she turned to spirituality and writing as a catalyst for her transformation. Sarah's superpower is creating and cultivating nourishing, healing environments. Spend any time around her and you'll just know why. She is an integral part of We Thrive Wellness Center in Belleville, Ontario. She is also the co-founder of Bliss Before Laundry. That's a women's retreat in Ontario that always sells out, but more importantly, creates a space for women to show up for themselves and for one another. Quite simply, Sarah's purpose is to hold space for the personal growth, transformation, and healing of others. Sarah, I welcome you.
Thank you, Adrienne. Oh my gosh, I'm getting emotional. It's really beautiful to to hear myself described that way. Thank you. That was your words were very generous. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. And just as an extension of that introduction, my personal introduction is that Sarah is just this incredible person. So I'm grateful to collaborate with her, call her a friend. And we had some technical glitches the first time we tried this and ended up having this beautiful conversation about the importance of storytelling. And Sarah is the first person who really nudged me to share my own story, which felt incredibly vulnerable and still always does. But I'm becoming more comfortable with it. The vulnerability is always a bit of a struggle, but so I want to thank you here. And I also just really want to create a great space for you to tell your story, because I know that it is really going to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you. I remember very vividly you telling your story for the first time at one of our Bliss weekends years ago. And I remember it feeling like we could all hear a pin drop, because I think that's what happens when we tell real stories and we have real conversations, and we get comfortable with showing up as who we really are. I think people are captivated. I think that they love hearing someone's real story and finding those points of connection and realizing which parts are for them to learn from and which parts of the story are for them to be inspired by. Our stories provide a lot of hope for people. And so, yeah, I remember back vividly to you telling your story at Bliss. I was so grateful for your bravery and your courage that day.
I thought my heart was like going to pound right out of my chest, but it was so transformative for me too, because, the more I tell it, as I said, the vulnerability is always there, but the shame has left. And I've learned that sharing it is more important for the healing of myself and for other people than any, ego involved. So in your ability to create spaces where people can share their stories in a safe space and really, be heard and held is really, really powerful.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. I think it took me a while to realize that that's, what this go around with this human life was all about for me. I remember back to when everything kind of happened for me. I had an idyllic childhood. I had a very happy childhood, and I didn't have a lot of suffering and a lot of pain. And so when I was faced with it for the first time, it was like it took me aback. It took me a while to integrate and realize that, oh, I'm meant to learn from this and do something purposeful with this story. But there was a point, and I can share with you my story for sure. I'm totally happy to do that. But I do remember this interesting point at which someone I love very close to me had experienced significant mental illness, a very acute situation. And I remember wishing that I could write their story for them and tell the world and, share the learnings and share the struggle, because I wanted other people to know what was going on and what the reality was with their mental illness journey, and save other people that suffering. And I remember vividly sitting with this and then coming to the realization, actually, Sarah, this isn't your story. You can't tell this story. This is her story. And then weirdly enough, the universe kind of always delivers
Yeah.
exactly what you need and exactly what you ask for, sometimes in a very roundabout way, but it does happen. You're very, very powerful with your thoughts and your words. Anyways, about a year later, the exact same thing happened to
It's
me.
incredible.
And it became my story. And then it
Mhm.
became almost a responsibility to actually do what I said I wanted to do a year before and begin to share it. And, you know, I have that realization of how powerful a story shared can be and how much healing it can bring in sometimes really short periods of time has proven itself to me over and over, and like hundreds and hundreds of times. I've watched so many people now show up for themselves in a really courageous way and share their truth with other people. And through my work in the healing field and health and wellness field, I've had like the opportunity to do just that, to hold that safe space. And kind of what I find most helpful is when you actually go first and you say, hey, this is like me. I'm going to strip back all the roles and all the obligations I have, and the expectations that all the people I love or have responsibilities to and for. All those expectations they have of me, I'm just going to put them to the side for a second, and I'm just going to be real with you. And I'm just going to be who I am. And that practice of doing that, it is helpful if someone models it for you first and makes it safe for you to then go, because it takes practice. We get taught, I think, in this part of the world to put the expectations and the needs of others before our own so often. I think particularly as women, that's a really common experience, that we almost need practice. We need somebody to say, hey, like, this is how you can do it and you're going to be okay. When you tell everybody what it's like for you, you're not going to be judged. There's nothing to feel shame about. And actually, when you go through the process of sharing what's real for you, you're going to be really encouraged by the response that you get. Because I remember the very first time I wrote a blog post. So I don't know how well, I'll just tell this quick story. For about 2 years have been talking about how I wanted to tell my mental health journey story to a friend of mine, and he had a goal he was intent on achieving too. And so I went to visit him, and he said, Sarah, like, what are you waiting for? Can you just start your blog? I know you don't know how to start a blog, but teach yourself and get yourself onto the internet, and share this story with people, because they need to hear it. Like, this is helpful. And I kind of said back to him the same. I'm like, what are you waiting for? You're fearful about what? Like, just go do it. And we kind of challenged each other. And I went home that night. I stayed up really late and I figured out how to get a blog on the internet. And I wrote my first post, and I remember like hovering over the enter button, like,
Yes.
I'm going to actually put this out into the world. Like, really, I'm going to do this. Like, what kind of response is waiting for me on the other side of this? And I'm like, well, screw it. Like, I just got to do it, you know? And I took one last deep breath and hit enter. And one of the points I'd made in that very first post was, you know, now that I've told you that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and I've been formed and put in the hospital and all these things, you're going to look at me differently. And I remember somebody commenting back on that very first post and saying, yeah, actually, we do look at you differently. We admire you for your courage. We thank you for your bravery. You know, we appreciate you telling a story that so many other people are living vividly with pain and suffering as well. And the fact that you're brave enough to do this means that maybe I'm brave enough to do it too. And if we all do it
Yeah.
together, then maybe people will actually grow from this and get the supports and the help that they need. And in that moment, I was like, I read that comment and I just bawled, right? Because I thought,
Yeah. Like I
this
feel like doing
stuff,
right now.
yeah, like this stuff is powerful. And it's such a simple thing to do, is just tell your story, just be real. And I'm making it sound like it's easy, because it's not. Like,
No.
it's totally not.
But I also think too, the thing that I learned and that I hear you saying is, even regardless of the comments, and most of them are generous, is that like when you tell the truth, it's very freeing, and it connects you to people more than it alienates you. And when you're telling the truth, it's so freeing. You're just like, I'm okay with whatever your response is, because this is just true. You can't argue with that.
Absolutely. I remember someone very close to me too in the very beginning saying, you know, Sarah, if you're going to move through this and you're going to make sense of this diagnosis, you know, because bipolar disorder is a big diagnosis. It comes with
Hmm.
a lot of baggage, you know, it comes with a lot of assumptions. It comes with a huge truckload of like crazy stories and things that, especially my diagnosis before bipolar disorder was actually postpartum psychosis. And at that time, there had been some really high profile media stories about moms who had suffered with postpartum psychosis and done really drastic things to themselves and to their children, made some choices in desperate situations. And my heart just goes out to those families that had to deal with that. And so, you know, there's a lot of scary stuff around saying, putting your hand up and saying, hey, like, I have postpartum psychosis and
Yeah.
postpartum bipolar disorder and postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, the whole gamut. Like, I feel like so grateful for all of the opportunities to live through mania and psychosis and depression and OCD and all of it, so that I could be able to speak from a place of experience about these things. But I remember that person saying to me, you know, Sarah, you got to own this. Like, you got to
Yeah.
just be okay with this label. You've got to, you know, put it on and wear it about and get comfortable with it. Because if you don't, if you keep just pushing away what is real for so many other people, even if it doesn't resonate with you, like even if the label just doesn't feel good on, there's a way to nuance it. There's a way to play with it a bit, to own it and really dig into it and realize what are the positives that you're going to take from having to wear this label. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it was a powerful piece of advice. It was very subtle. It was just a short conversation, but it really did make me think and reflect. You know, it's true. There's a lot of stigma associated with this, and I'm just going to have to make my peace with this if I'm going to move forward in life.
Yeah. So let's dive in. Are you willing to share your story with us?
Oh, 100 million% I am. Yeah.
So wherever you want to start.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a nutshell, I think I mentioned before, I had a very idyllic childhood. I grew up in a very happy home. I have incredible parents. I have a mother who devoted herself to her family and who modeled for us what a loving mother is. And so I, from a very young age, wanted nothing more than to simply be a mom. And I had some career aspirations, but I said to myself repeatedly through my journaling as a teenager, through like any kind of forward goal setting that one thinks about when they're a teen and in their 20s, that and with my husband before we got married, was my goal is to be a good mom. And so when it came time to have kids, I was very expectant. I read all the books. Like I had like a pile beside my bedside table, a mile high. I made a beautiful bedroom for my son, and I was very expectant. I knew exactly what was happening in his development all along throughout my pregnancy. I had a pretty good pregnancy and a really beautiful birth. He came into the world. I didn't ask for, like, it was a really beautiful, gentle, progressive, natural birth with midwives. It was a gorgeous start to his life. Uh, and then it just somewhere took a turn very early after he was born. I struggled, really hard with breastfeeding. I had made assumptions that it was going to be a naturally easy thing to do. I was the first of my friends and family to have a baby, so I was quite naive in what it meant to be responsible for a little person 24/7. And those first few weeks were hell. And I went from being someone who was, I would consider myself to be pretty determined person, and had very high expectations for myself, and had, built up an identity for myself. And I felt like in those first few weeks, all of the things that I had achieved in my life didn't really matter, because I couldn't help this little person thrive. I was struggling, and it was devastating. And the emotional toll it took on me, ultimately meant that I slipped into a postpartum depression. And because I was, a person who likes to not show that I'm struggling, and I hadn't dealt with a lot of struggle in my life up until that point. I didn't quite know what to do with it other than to just hide it. And so that's what I did. And I soldiered on, and I pretended like I was fine. And for the first time in my life, I was really, really dealing with crippling anxiety and depression, and compulsive behaviors and worries about my child's safety. And that led to, not getting enough sleep, not having enough support around me, telling myself for the first time in my life as a very determined, like confident person, that I was terrible, that I was a terrible mother, that I, sucked at this. I'm starting to get emotional because it was a very, very painful part of my life. And it was very isolating, because I didn't want anyone to know that I didn't have the connection that I expected to have with my baby, that I didn't even want any of it. I used to fantasize about leaving the country with a backpack, just heading to the airport and saying, where can I go? I wanted to run away from my life, and it was awful. And so I managed somehow to get through that first year with my son. And then a little while later, I got pregnant again. And I brought my second son into the world. Again, a beautiful birth, like midwives, everything was nice. We, by this point, had talked a little bit about, my struggles with my midwives before. So they were somewhat aware of what I've been through. But I had never received like a diagnosis or medication the first time around. So there wasn't a lot of support there. And then about 8 months after my second son was born, I began to not be able to sleep. The sleepless nights and the lack of just deep rest was really catching up with me, and I just couldn't pretend anymore. And what, was crippling anxiety and compulsive behaviors turned into mania, which I had no idea how to deal with that properly. And for me, it very quickly escalated from mania into psychosis.
How would you describe mania and psychosis?
It's funny, you know, after my first experience with mania and psychosis, my doctor said to me, he said, that must have been a very terrifying experience. And I said to him, actually, no. from my perspective, I was the happiest I have been in years, because leading up to that, I had been so deeply depressed and not able to talk about it. And so mania was such an opposite to depression. When you're manic, like in the beginning stages of mania, when you're hypomanic, you have a lot of energy. You begin to stop hearing the ego fear-based voice in your head. So you begin to feel more sociable. You don't worry about what other people are thinking of you. You don't even think it. You don't worry about whether or not something you're choosing to do is irresponsible or too risky. You just do it because you don't have the fear-based ego voice in your head saying, no, nay, don't do that. You're not good enough. That voice is gone. And so you see a lot of people in a manic state not acting like their true self that their loved ones are used to, because they're taking risks that they wouldn't normally take. And you have such intense energy. You have trouble sleeping. I always lose weight because I forget to eat, because I don't feel hunger. I don't feel the same sort of grounded human urges that keep me feet flat on the ground. I kind of start to float into this different dimension. That's the only way I can really describe it, is that you live in a non-ordinary state of consciousness. And if you let the mania go too long and you don't have checks and balances in your brain, like me, sometimes it can lead to psychosis. I kind of liken it to a thermostat. So, a healthy person who doesn't have mental illness has like resets in their brain, that as you build too many neurotransmitters that in your brain, chemistry that cause you to become more manic, your brain resets itself. And so for me, that's what medication does. I'm so grateful I have one that works. But when it gets too out of control, even sometimes the medication doesn't always do its job. If it's not high enough dose, and it can run away. It's like runaway mania turned into psychosis, and then it's hallucinations and delusions and all kinds of interesting stuff. But I remember saying to my doctor, like, no, actually, this is the happiest I've ever been. Like in the last few years, it's the most energy I've had. I really miss my mania. And so that's what a lot of people who live through mania will say, is that it's easier. It's not easy. Your heart rate is really fast. You are exhausted on some level, but you do have energy and you keep going and you're a lot of fun. So mania can be kind of fun. And I even wrote a blog post about it afterwards, saying how much I missed it, because I, in some ways, like the woman I am when I'm just a little bit manic. So, yeah.
So interesting, like it's just, yeah, to hear your firsthand description of it, because we hear these terms, tossed around. And that's why I was curious to ask you, is like, what does it actually mean,
It's, it's it was interesting, because some of the people that commented on that blog post that I'd written about missing my mania, they were agreeing as well. But you have to recognize too that because our brain doesn't reset itself like a thermostat, that there is danger in allowing it to continue and to escalate.
Yeah. So where did this go next?
So in that episode, it led to psychosis, which basically had me living in a world where I believed I could die and come back as anyone I wanted to. And at one point found myself like in an ambulance being transported from one hospital to another, thinking that if I just threw myself out the back of the ambulance, I could come back as whoever I wanted. So that's where, like, if a psychotic episode has gone too far, like my mania has gone too far, and now we're dealing with psychosis, it can be really dangerous. But what I struggled with, Adrienne, truthfully, for years, and I still don't think I've made full sense of it, was that as much as there were hallucinations and delusions that were simply things that weren't true, there was an aspect to my mania and psychosis that was deeply spiritual, deeply transformational. It gives me shivers and pins and needles to just think about it right now, because I existed in a state of consciousness that most people don't get to go into. And in that state of consciousness, there was more information accessible to me. I've often thought, if I wrote a book about all this, it would have to be called Too Much Information, because in that state, I got to experience, as much as I struggled to maintain groundedness and wellness in that state, I also was being taught and was opening aspects of myself that have served me deeply since that experience. And I continue to learn from every single day. This was my first brush with psychosis, but it certainly wasn't my last. And so what's been most difficult for me to reconcile is that when I go into these psychotic states, the conventional side of medicine, which I'm so grateful for because it's brought treatments and medications that help me live a human life, that world looks at talking about God and talking about oneness and talking about knowingness and psychic opening and all of these things that sort of happened to me in that period of time of my life as symptoms. And the medications are important to keeping me well, but when you lean too far into the conventional world and don't allow for the richness of the experience to be told in its fullness because you're worried that someone will tell you you're just being crazy, we're missing out on some of the most transformational lessons that human beings can learn living a human life. And I'm deeply curious about why, my husband gets asked, is she talking more about God when I'm in a psychotic episode, as a checkbox on a list that proves that I'm crazy? To me, that's deeply curious. Why isn't that fascinating to us as human beings, that when we go into these vulnerable states where we may not be very grounded in our human life, we all of a sudden start realizing that there is more to life than the physical shows us every day.
Absolutely. Like, it's just incredible. And especially when, it's consistent enough to be a checkbox.
Exactly.
Which is what you're saying. It's just incredible. And you used the word that I was thinking as you were talking. I was like, what's the right word? But, the word reconcile, because I would just imagine, we just don't want to dismiss this. And yet, like, as you said, we would need to live this human life, and it's a lot to balance.
Definitely. If I can tell a quick story here, I think
Please.
I've told you this before, but my last psychotic episode was 2 days before opening our wellness center, which was such a labor of love and intense period of time. Obviously, opening a bricks and mortar place is a ton of work. And so I exhausted myself and I pushed myself into mania, and I didn't see my signs and pull myself back, and eventually ended up in a psychotic state. And that period of time was like absolutely mind blowing. There was so many signs, so many things that I was learning. Each time I go into a psychotic state, I almost feel like I go through a leveling up in terms of universal wisdoms and teachings that I'm being shown. It's very interesting. It's almost like I go through the psychotic period to integrate everything. It's fascinating. But that period of time, my family had been through this with me a couple of times already. So there's kind of like a safety plan. Like, we just know what to do. We all come around Sarah. We feed her lots of nourishing foods. We make sure she goes to sleep, and we get her full of her medications. Like, that's the process. And they were trying very hard to get me to my opening of the wellness center. They really wanted me to be there and be present that day because I had been working so hard for so many months. And they did actually get me to the event, but I was so vacant, like so not in the human world at that point in time, that I couldn't show up for the people that, for our team and for our guests that day. I just couldn't. So I kind of holed myself away in my office for the day and pretended like I was in treatment with clients at the moment.
Yeah.
But anyways, that period of time, I remember, if I go right back to the beginning, when the doctor gave me my diagnosis, postpartum bipolar disorder, they sort of gave me this little fact sheet from the hospital. And they said, here's what bipolar disorder is. Here's the symptoms, this is what you have. And I remember going home and being like, okay, check, check, check. All these things make sense. But what the heck do I do with like the lucid dreams that I dream and then the next day come true? What do I do with feeling visited in the middle of the night by some kind of presence that keeps showing me synchronicities and signs? And what do I do with like this increased sense of smell and taste and hearing? What do I do with the thoughts of the knowings that I now have about, people that I don't even know? And then they come to tell me that, yeah, that's true about their life or their job or how do I reconcile all of this? And I remember sitting down at my computer at that time and Googling like, bipolar disorder, psychic dreams, being visited in the night. Like I sort of put it all down. And what came up for me was a concept called a spiritual emergency. And I read the description, and the person who kept coming up in all the research articles and all the information about a spiritual emergency was Dr. Stanislav Grof. And he worked down in the States as a researcher and had coined the term spiritual emergence, which is this awakening, this opening that happens where you start to become the divine nature of the universe becomes more accessible to you. And you start to feel that oneness and that universal love. And if you have supports around you, and if you have vocabulary to understand what's going on, and if you have people in your life who support you in exploring that, you can have an emergence and you can learn things and you can grow as a human being, and it serves you. But if you don't have supports around you, if you don't have the vocabulary, if you have no idea what's going on, sometimes this emergence can slip into an emergency and look very much like a psychotic episode. And so when I put the combination of symptoms that I was experiencing that first episode into the computer and Googled it, this is what was spit back at me, was a spiritual emergency. Well, I couldn't take that to my family doctor.
No,
he wouldn't have known what to do with that. So it almost became like this little secret that I carried with me, that I was like, okay, I tell the world I have bipolar disorder, but what do I do with this other piece of information that feels so much more resonant to me? Like it completes the picture and explains the whole story.
Yeah.
And so I just left it there. And I just kept saying, it's not my job to prove that this is a thing. Like, I'm just going to be quiet about this. And I'm going to talk to everybody about mental illness and bipolar disorder. And I'm going to own that. And I'm going to be fine with that. But this truth sort of sat with me for years, and it kept kind of poking me. And then I had another episode and 2 years later, and more growth and more learnings and more awakening, to the point where I started to do mediumship readings for people and utilize the skills that I was learning. And then I opened the center and I worked on Bliss before laundry and all that, and had all of these amazing interactions with people and helped them hold space for their healing. And then fast forward to opening like We Thrive and having this other psychotic break. And at this point, I had a lot more confidence because I had literally been talking to dead people for years. And so I knew that there was more to life than just the physical. I knew it with certainty.
Yes.
It was not just a thing that I would say. I believed it. Every single cell of my body knows this to be true. We live after we die. Our consciousness, we use our soul, our body, we leave our body, but our soul lives on. And so when this episode happened before opening We Thrive in 2017, I started saying to my family in a psychotic state, this isn't bipolar disorder. Please look up spiritual emergency. Please look up spiritual emergence. And my family was like, Sarah, no, this is bipolar, blah, blah, blah. And I lost it because I needed someone to listen to me. And I totally downward spiraled into a dark night of the soul. I said, forget it. I give up. No one listens to me. I'm done. And I had that moment, that reckoning with God. And I said, you know what? I've done a lot of good. I'm ready to go. Just take me, please. And it was interesting because right at that moment, I was in my bed. I was wailing, crying. My husband's like, you know what, Sarah, I can't listen to this pain. I got to leave you alone. Are you going to be okay? And I'm like, yeah, I just got to get this out. And I was like, God, I can't be a medium for you anymore. I don't want to prove that any of this is real. Just let me be a normal human being. Just let me be, like everybody else. And I had a number with God. God had, like, universal love has a number with me at that point in my life. It was 932. I kept seeing it every day. 923 and 932 is like a sign from the universe that ascended masters and guides are helping you with your career. And so I had seen it every day for like years at this point. And so I rolled over in my bed and I'm just wailing and wailing and wailing, just being done with this. And I look at my clock and it's 9:32. And I
Oh
knew in
my
that
God.
instant, no, dude, you're not going anywhere. You
You're
got to
not
stay
getting off the
here.
bus. The bus
No,
is still moving.
no. And what was interesting was the next day or the day after, something like that, my sister called me and she said, "Hey, Sarah, I don't know what to do with this." And I said, "What?" And she's like, "I listened to you. I went home. I started Googling a spiritual emergency and I'm freaking out." And I was like, "Uh-huh." And she's like, "No, I'm serious. I think that what you're going through really, like, there's a lot of things lining up here. And I don't know how to make sense of it." And she's like, "And here's the weirdest part. When I was looking up spiritual emergency and looking into it, I came across a doctor down in the States, a psychiatrist. His name is Dr. Stanislav Grof." And I said, I know. I know the guy. I've read his stuff. Like, I've read one of his books. Like, I know. And she's like, no. This is the weird part. When I was watching one of his videos explaining what a spiritual emergency is, he was very uncannily familiar to me and it was bugging me. And that's when she realized that he had the same last name as her psychiatrist here in Canada. She's like, there's no way these two people are related. She Googled it and figured out that Stanislav Grof is the very brother of her psychiatrist here in Canada. They are.
I remember you telling me this story. It's just, yeah. And
That's a coincidence that you can't. No, we're two sisters. We both have a mental illness journey. She's a nurse and followed a different path with it in the beginning. She has since circled back and now is a yoga teacher and incorporates a lot of spiritual practice into her own management of her mental illness. But the coincidence was too much for me to bear. And so it was just what I needed to start to think, well, maybe I can contact her psychiatrist. Maybe I can develop a relationship with this guy. Maybe on some level, he trusts his brother's work as sort of fringe as it is. And maybe there's a place in the middle for me somewhere.
Yeah.
So I started going to my sister's psychiatrist, and to speed up the story, about a year and a half into my treatment with him, I finally got up the nerve. I didn't want him to think I was just coming to him for learning about his brother's work. So I said nothing about his brother's work for like almost 2 years. And then finally, at my last session with him, actually, I said, "Look, here's what I know about what your brother believes and what he researches. And here's what I know about you. And I want you to tell me, did I have a spiritual emergency or do I have bipolar disorder? Just tell me." And he said, "Sarah," he went into this big, long conversation about physics and dimensions and, universal love and everything. And in the end, he basically said to me, "Sarah, I believe that you did experience several spiritual emergencies and spiritual emergences. And I also believe that you have bipolar disorder. And you need to reconcile living in the middle, where you have the supreme gift of going to a place where a lot of people don't ever get to go in their human life, and then coming back and telling us about it." And helping teach us how we bridge this divide of the magic, living in the moment, experiencing the magic of life, but also being grounded and being healthy and being well and using the tools that we've developed as humans in order to be able to live this human life. So the circle around for me, that was what I needed to hear. You have bipolar disorder and there's such a thing called a spiritual emergence.
I love it. It just sounds like all of the pieces come into place. And I also always, in every instance, love the word "and," because many things can be true, right? We often think it has to be this or it has to be this. And all of this is true. And I mean, I feel like this is a question that could take hours or days or years, but in a few minutes, like what are the core messages? Like, what messages for me today, for the people listening to this podcast, what are the core things that you really want them to know?
Life is beautiful and magical and working every single millisecond in your favor. That um, that it's a gift and a privilege to live a human life and experience the duality of life. That without pain and suffering, we cannot know true joy and ecstasy and happiness. That when you're going through something difficult and painful, to be in that, and acknowledge it. Don't hide your feelings, don't run from them. Every feeling it's just baked right into the word. Feelings are meant to be felt. Be here, be present, be open to the possibility that you don't know everything, that there's a lot to learn, from the people around you, from each lived experience, and trust that things are working out for you. Because when you put your attention and your intention on that, and allowing yourself to think thoughts and choose actions that are in line with the idea that possibilities are endless, that life is magical, that things are working in your favor, your life becomes that much more incredible. And when you're dealt something difficult, like being formed and put in the hospital, and going through, something like how I've gone through, you can dwell in the difficulty of that. You can grieve it and feel badly about it, but don't stay there. Don't stay stuck in that, because when you can move through it and allow yourself to grow and change and transform, I mean, there is so much awaiting you, so much growth and possibility awaiting you when you can do that. And one of the most powerful ways that you can move through difficult things is showing up for yourself and being brave and saying, you know what, this is what I went through. Hey, anybody else out there going through this? Because I could use some help. I could use some support. I could use a kind friend right now. Don't suffer through the difficult parts of human life alone. You are not meant to. That's not what a human life is about. You are encircled with all kinds of support, resources, people, angels, people that pop in with just the right message at just the right time to help pick you up if you're willing to see it, and that ultimately is what's beautiful about a human life, is that you get to choose. You can choose a life for yourself that is difficult and is painful, but you can also choose one that's really magical and beautiful.
I'm speechless, except to say thank you. It's just so beautiful. And it just, when I'm hearing you say this, um, I'm thinking a few things. I'm thinking about my own journey and how, yeah, I had to move through that and decide I'm not going to stay here. Like, I'm going to keep moving. And I do want to feel joy all the time. And I'm willing to feel all the other stuff, but I'm always going to navigate with and towards that. And in doing that work, I've talked to so many people who are like, well, that's, somehow fine for me, but not fine for them. There's this sense of that's for other people, or I'm not worthy, or I'm going to do it later. And I've seen that in the circles at Bliss where people get stuck in the struggle. And you talked about willingness. In how do you guide people just to open up to that willingness and take those first few steps? Like, what are the simple things that people can do?
I mean, sometimes, definitely in my journey and based on my lived experience, there's a time for being stuck. There's a lot that you can learn in being stuck. There's the discomfort of feeling like this pain's never going to end and I'm going to be here forever, and I don't know what my next right step is. And I feel very strongly that we get to as this universal consciousness come into a human body and live this human life so that we have the dualistic experience. So I firmly believe that, the pain and the struggle and the stuckness serves a very big purpose. And so when I'm with someone and I can feel, they're really not ready yet to open their mouth and share, that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, they are where they need to be. It's all perfect. Like, there is perfection in everything. And so there's no judgment, there's no expectation at all. If they need to be in that place, that's where they need to be. So in those kinds of moments in sitting with someone, I just model, like I model what has worked for me. And what has worked for me is not necessarily going to work for everyone else. I don't expect someone who's going through something really painful to be totally comfortable at the first suggestion that they might want to share their story, to be able to just show up and share their story. I had to drink a lot of wine, liquid courage, the first time I thought about reading from my journal in a public venue and sharing my story with strangers. It's hella scary. So, what do I do with people who aren't ready to show up like that for themselves? It's okay. You just go do what you're going to do and share what you know and share what your lived experience is. And they're going to take from it what tiny little seed or kernel is helpful to them. At the very least, they're going to see a person who wants to be there for them and wants to remind them that, you know what, as horrible as you feel right now and as stuck as you feel, I can promise you one thing, and I'm promising this to you with 100% certainty. There is nothing more that I can promise than things change. Things do not stay the same forever. You will not be in this exact place, 10 days from now or 5 years from now. You just can't be. Things grow, things shift. That's the natural order of life. Sometimes people punish themselves because of their beliefs that they hold. And then oftentimes these beliefs are subconscious. So if we hold space for them and hold space for the possibility that core beliefs can be shifted and can be changed, and we teach people that anything is possible, then it provides hope. And it provides, as long as a human is hopeful, there's no need to end the story yet. Like, this story will grow and evolve and change. I think I just try to focus on the fact that everything is possible, everything is magical, and you are going to get out of this place.
And so tell us, you can start with Bliss Before Laundry or We Thrive, but in our last little bit together, I want people to know about, the incredible work that you're doing in both of those places.
Yeah, I mean, things started with Bliss Before Laundry. Several years ago, I went to university with Gabby, one of my close friends. We'd maintained our friendship, but she traveled the world working in international development, and I was at home trying to do the same, but from my little town. And so we got back together years later, and she had been going through a divorce and trying to heal from the pain of that. And I was healing from the pain of mental health crisis. And we found out that we both had this shared goal of creating safe space for women. And we actually both had the idea of putting together some kind of women's weekend or conference or something. So we're kind of both motivated, get it done type people. So as soon as we realized this shared goal, that was the end of it. Like, we just started having meetings, and that was February 2014. By the fall that year, we had our first weekend put together, and it was largely full of people that loved us and wanted to support us. We had 87 women come to that first weekend, and when we look back on it fondly, we learned a lot from it. It was also a bit of a gong show in terms of, feeding that many people and holding space for all that work that gets done during the weekend. And we thought it was a one-time thing. Truthfully, at the end of the weekend, we're like, well, job well done. Thanks everybody for coming.
Little
And
did you know. Oh my God.
so yeah,
People
so
won't even let you stop if you wanted to.
no, I mean, that's really what I guess we just realized, wow, there's a need for this. Like there's a real need for this. And so the women basically said to us, when is the next one? And we kind of looked at each other and went, we didn't know there was going to be a next one. But there was. And now we're 13 weekends in, and we go back to the same venue every fall, except this past fall, of course, due to COVID reasons. But now we've transitioned Bliss Before Laundry into the virtual sphere. And I have to say, before our virtual weekend in November, I was a skeptic. Like I didn't think that the virtual world could hold safe space the same way that you can in person, but I was proven wrong. Our community showed up again for each other. There was transformation and healing that happened even through a screen. I mean, I was blown away by it. So that's our goal now, is for the next year to try to hold as many virtual opportunities to connect and support each other until things return to some kind of familiar normal again, and we'll go back to in person. But yeah, they're life-changing transformational events. We've had husbands call us, we've had people tell us, Bliss saved my marriage. We've had people tell us that before the weekend suicide was an option, and now it's not. We've had, I don't know what the secret ingredients are, Adrian. All I know is that we just kind of pull together a place. We pull together wholesome food that nourishes people while we do this, spend this time with each other. And we just show up in a real way, and it resonates with women. It resonates with them big enough to see some pretty cool transformations.
It is. And I think, it's having been there a number of times myself, it's also just, I think it's the fact that you guys provide such an invitation for women to show up as they are, so there's no, transformation agenda, if you will. If you want to be quiet, you want to take part, you want to share, it's very safe and supportive. And also, all of the women are so open. You just feel like you could sit down at a table with anyone and be welcomed. And I don't know what else you could ask for.
I think that when you present an invitation to women, and I'm a woman, so I can only really speak from this perspective, but when you present an invitation to, all right, in your everyday life, there's a lot of stuff in terms of expectations placed upon you. And all you're going to do this weekend is do whatever the hell you want. If you want to go to that workshop, go to it. If you want to sleep in, sleep in. If you don't want to eat this food and you want to eat that food, eat it. And there's something very refreshing, especially for a lot of women in their middle of their life, when so many of them choose to have families. There's something very refreshing for somebody to give you that kind of permission and just say, do you know, like, I even remind women as simple as this: look, we're going to have an event right now. We're going to have a circle discussion. And if you have to go to the washroom in the middle of it, don't wait to the end.
Yeah.
Get up and take care of your needs. And so when someone says that to you, take care of yourself first. This weekend, you are top priority, and nothing else is as important as you. A lot of women exhale in a really big way. They go, what? Like, this is transformational for me already. We haven't even done it.
I'm in a foreign country. What do I do?
Exactly. So I just love watching that happen. It's the same recipe every time. People come in on Friday. Some of them are dragged there by their friends saying, you have to come to this. You have to try this. They sit in opening circle, quite scared, a little shy. They watch a bunch of women be brave. They get a little braver. They go to another workshop the next day. They see more sharing. They get a little braver. By the end of the weekend, the woman who came in on the Friday scared and a shell of herself, not knowing who she is a totally different person less than 48 hours later. And you're like, on the Sunday, it's like, hello, nice to meet you, the real you.
Now that we've stripped everything else away.
Exactly.
And what about We Thrive?
We Thrive is, I guess I like going into business with friends. Like they say, don't do that.
but it works for you.
Apparently it does. So yeah, We Thrive is a collaboration between a really close friend of mine, Crystal Smith, and I. She had the idea to open a health clinic for women. It was going to be very physically medicine based, and she picked my brain about it. And I just, funnily enough, the night before had been fantasizing about opening a spiritual wellness center for women, which had never been a goal. And I'd never had that thought before. So it was weird timing. And I just said, hey, well, here's some ideas. Like, why don't you consider mental, emotional health as well? Why don't you consider spiritual health? Like, why don't you make it really holistic? And she loved that idea. Next thing we know, she's asking me if I want to partner with her on it. And I think we were just gifted with the idea, and again, we're the kind of people that just sort of take something and run with it without a lot of fear. And I think the idea was given to us. There's been so many guided signs along the way that reaffirm that, okay, you two show up. Can you just be instruments for us for a little bit here? And this idea is going to have its own legs. And that's exactly what's happened. Is there's been this beautiful creation of a community in the Quinte Belleville area that now is expanding into the virtual sphere and going all around, much wider geographically. And this team of like incredible human beings who have all had their own pain and their own healing journey show up and say, hey, I'm a team member. And you recognize them as soon as you meet them. And the hiring process for building a team of practitioners is just easy peasy, because there's something very magical about it. We don't do the normal resume process that most people do. And we have this incredible team. And we basically took kind of the concept of Bliss and put it in a bricks and mortar location and said, let's just be here every day, showing up for people and holding space for them. And that's just really what we do. We provide all kinds of services. We do events, classes, yoga, meditation, talks, workshops, sessions. We have one-on-one services, psychotherapy, counseling, massage therapy, life coaching, hypnosis, spa, and aesthetics. Like, it goes on. And it shifts and changes over the years as we bring in different team members. But it's kind of magical how it works. And you just sort of step back and surrender to the whole thing and go, wow, like, I'm so grateful to be a part of all of this.
Sarah, I can't thank you enough. As I said earlier, I'm just like a little speechless, just in that I don't think my words are going to do justice to how I'm feeling. I'm so grateful for you as a friend, as a person in the world, as a leader, as a storyteller, as a healer, a writer, and the list just goes on. And I'm sure everybody who is listening to this will join me in thanking you just for your rich authenticity in sharing this story, in bringing these messages to us so that we can take them in and learn from them. So in the show notes on the website, everybody will be able to contact you. So I hope that you are just like overflowed with people. But before we sign off, I just want to ask you, if there's anything that didn't get said that you want to say, or if there are any inspiring words, like whatever's coming to you, I invite you to share it.
Well, I mean, first, I want to say thank you to you, Adrienne. This has been a beautiful conversation. I mean, our conversations always flow so easily. I could spend hours with you.
Me too. It's dangerous.
I just love you so much. And I need to acknowledge the light in you and the way that you inspire people, and the way that you walk through life with such insight and willingness to lead people as well, but also just to be real with people. I love you so deeply, and this has been a beautiful experience. But I think I would just say to people, trust that your life means something. Trust that that you have within you everything that you possibly could ever need. That if there's ever an answer that you're seeking, advice that you're seeking, the absolute best person to seek that from is yourself. And learn the tools and the strategies to go within and be reflective and honor your feelings and honor your knowings and your nudges and all those breadcrumbs that are laid out before you to keep proving to you over and over and over until until it settles in. And maybe it won't in this lifetime, but I surely hope that it does. That life is magical, that you are perfect, whole, and complete just as you are, and that you will be well. You will be well, and you will be supported and guided and protected always.
Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Adrienne. This was fun.
So much fun. Thank you for listening. May some of the wisdom shared here inspire your most intentional living. For more information about this episode, this podcast, intentional living, and my work in the world, please visit mayyouknowjoy.com. You can also find my May You Know Joy and Seeds of Intention cards there, and my book, Intentional Days. You'll also find details for the Intentional Days membership, where you can gain access to a thriving community of intentional souls and lots of regular inspiration. I've got you covered. Until next time, I wish you great joy and many intentional days.